So somebody says to you, Johann Sebastian Bach. Is there an image that comes to mind? Maybe this one. This is probably the most famous painting we have of Bach. He was about 3 years before his death, 62, 63 at this time when this painting was made. There's another picture of Bach floating around, but we're not really sure it's actually Bach. This is supposedly Bach when he was younger, all handsome and whatnot, but we're not really sure it's Bach. So we don't have a lot of images of Bach, but what we do have is just about everything he ever did on any given day of his life. He's been studied extensively. Here are some highlights. He learned to play the violin from his father. He learned to play the organ from his older brother, Johann Christoph Bach, not to be confused with the uncle, Johann Christoph Bach. By the age of 10, he was orphaned. At 17, he auditioned for a position in Sangerhausen and was clearly the more qualified candidate, but a regional duke stepped in and gave the job to somebody else. Shortly after that, he took a job at Arnstadt. He was 18 years old. And it's during this time when he took the famous walk about 200 miles up to Lübeck to visit his friend Buxtehude just for a short time and stayed 4 months. Kind of angered his current employers at Arnstadt when he did that. In 1707, he moved to Mühlhausen and married his second cousin, as you do, Maria Barbara Bach. She didn't even have to change her monogram. They would go on to have 7 children. Shortly after that, Bach took a position at the court as court organist in Weimar. This is now his 3rd position in 5 years, so definitely a 20-something, just hopping around, doing what he wants, working at the court of the Duke of Weimar. In 1717, he signed a contract to become the Kapellmeister at the court of Prince Leopold in Anhalt-Köthen. Of course, he didn't bother telling the Duke of Weimar that, and the Duke of Weimar got so upset, he said, "You're going to jail." So Bach spent 3 weeks in jail. He was eventually released from jail and his contract in Weimar and went to work for Prince Leopold, and it's during that time that he assembled the Well-Tempered Clavier, in addition to a lot of other music. In 1719, he tried to meet up with George Frederick Handel, who was much more famous at the time, but they never met, despite being born in the same year and only ever living about 80 miles apart. In 1720, Bach's wife died, and he was so overcome with grief that Bach remarried a woman 16 years younger within about 6 months. The issues surrounding the death of Bach's first wife have always been a little bit suspect. I don't think anybody has ever asserted that there was foul play, but Bach may have already been stepping out with this cute young thing, Anna Magdalena Wilken. In 1722, Bach was looking for new employment because Prince Leopold got married and for some reason wasn't interested in music anymore. So Bach finally took a job at Leipzig, and that's where he spent the remainder of his life and where he would be the most prolific, particularly with the cantatas that we've all come to know and love. Bach was the 3rd choice of the search committee at Leipzig. They wanted to give the job to Georg Telemann, but he was only auditioning so he could get more money at his current position. The second guy fell through and couldn't get out of his job, so they said, well, here you go, Bach, you can have this job at Leipzig. And it was there that he did all of this work. I can't even imagine. Was writing new music on a weekly basis, had to provide new cantatas every month. So much work. He often got into arguments. He was a contentious man, and I would assume difficult to get along with. Someone of so much talent probably didn't have a lot of time for people's nonsense. But that's usually what makes for historical figures, and the rest of us just kind of go away in relative obscurity and spend our lives being decent people. Toward the end of his life, he had eye surgery, believe it or not, in around 1749, but that's probably contributed to his death, that his sight was gone and his health was failing. He died in Leipzig in 1750. He was 65 years old. He spent the entirety of his life in an area about the size of the average American state. never visited another country, and even within Germany, he didn't move around a whole lot. One thing about Bach, though, is he lived a storied life. It was a life of privilege, but also a life of tragedy. At one point he lost twins. Twin children died at never reaching the age of 1. Went through a lot of adversity with work, but he also broke the rules a lot, and that's what makes him so great. And that's why I mention it today, because we're going to hear a couple of pieces. You hear a lot of tragedy in this first prelude, this E minor prelude. It's haunting even. And the fugue is a fugue for 2 voices. I consider myself a learned man, but I never knew you could have a fugue for 2 voices. I always thought they had to at least be 3, 4, 5, and kind of maxed out at 6. Maybe my more learned musicology people can set me straight. But fugue for 2 voices, and during the course of that fugue, there are parallel octaves. That's -10 on the John Bernthal music theory scale. You weren't supposed to write parallel octaves, but sure enough, there they are. So, what a man, what a life. Here is the Prelude and Fugue in E minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier, J.S. Bach.